Developers, the wizards that shape your company like nobody else. Their code helps build your products, develop systems, and keeps your entire technology infrastructure from falling apart. But hiring the right developers is a tricky task. You receive a lot of applications, but you only want the best. So how do you identify the best developers without spending a lot of valuable time on the wrong candidates? Introducing HackerEarth's technical recruitment software, a platform that helps you hire the best developers by using online tests to assess your applicants. Here's how it works. With HackerEarth, you can invite candidates to remotely appear for customized coding tests for any technical role. And once they take your tests, you can access detailed performance reports to decide who makes it through to the next rounds. Auto-generate highly customized tests for any technical role, even if you're not a developer yourself. Access our library of more than 15,000 inbuilt questions, or add and use your own. With over 35 programming languages supported, you can receive submissions in the language of your choice. The system magically evaluates the code submissions based on multiple parameters. And you get detailed reports on each candidate's performance. Copying or using any unfair means on a test is impossible, thanks to our proctoring measures and plagiarism detection techniques. HackerEarth helps you optimize your tech hiring process by scaling your hiring efforts, improving your accuracy, and reducing your time to hire. Tech recruiters use HackerEarth for a variety of requirements, identifying the right candidates during lateral hiring, scaling their university recruitment efforts, and aiding workplace diversity through blind hiring. More than 500 companies globally use HackerEarth to assess developers. Now, it's your turn to transform your hiring process. Register for a free trial today and try HackerEarth now.
So very warm welcome to everyone present today, and thank you so much for sparing out some time from your busy schedules to attend this webinar. Today we have Miss Emilia, and she's going to cover the important topic of how you can improve diversity in your organization using better hiring practices. So without further ado, I'll hand over the mic to Miss Emilia and she'll take this forward.
Hi, Arbaz. Thanks for having me today. And thanks everyone for joining us. I hope you're able to see my screen. All right. And just a little bit about myself. And before we start, if you have any questions throughout the session, please do share them in the chat. I will be looking at it and happy to pause throughout the presentation, as I'd like for this presentation to be interactive. So a little bit about me. I am from Italy and I was brought up in Canada, and today I live in San Francisco. I've had the good fortune of traveling and working globally. And most recently, I did my MBA and my thesis in India, where I worked with the Don Bosco Research Group. So through all of these opportunities, I've been able to work with companies and really better understand the benefits of diversity and inclusion in global companies. So what we'll cover today are the current workplace and recruiting biases. Predominantly, I'll be focusing on technology because that's where I've spent the majority of my career. And then I'll look at why when you expand the workforce pool, it makes sense not only for your company, but for the bottom line, for the profits, and for the people you're serving. So we'll talk about that. And then probably why many of you are here today. Well, this all sounds great, but how do you get executive buy-in? So we'll look at some very successful companies globally and how they did it and how it's impacting their companies. And last but not least, what actions can you take today? What technologies out there that can help you create more inclusive programs? So why would you think about stereotypes? Do you even think about stereotypes? Many people don't think about it when they join a company. And when we think about why stereotypes are not good for companies, we looked at research and we can say that it leads to poor productivity. For example, if you feel uncomfortable in your workplace, you probably aren't going to be able to focus on your work and do a good job. No one wants to work in a place where you feel there's racism, sexism, ageism, where there's classism or homophobia. And if you're in one of those workplaces, then you're going to leave. There's low retention, there's low morale. Studies show that people of color are 3 times more likely than white counterparts to quit a job based on perceived unfair practices at work based on their race. Other studies show that gay and lesbian professionals and managers cite workplace unfairness as the reason they leave employers almost twice as often as a heterosexual white male. So having these intolerant cultures will make a workplace a roller coaster of instability. And when you don't feel comfortable in a workplace, then it cuts off opportunities for growth and competition because people don't want to speak up. They don't want to share their ideas out of the fear that they might be different. So let's look at some of these isms and then we'll talk about what can be done about them. So one of the many unconscious biases in the workplace is gender. And I'll start with this one because I happen to be a female and obviously it's important to me. I also have two daughters that will eventually be entering the workforce as well. And you'll notice here that the fastest growing jobs also happen to be the lowest representation of women when it comes to architecture and engineering, computer and math, and management. Yet the greatest jobs at risk right now because of things like artificial intelligence, automation, are office and administrators. How many of us can remember when our bosses had an admin, but today they do the work themselves, or there's a program that they put all the content they need help with, and then the computer helps them instead of an administrator. So it is indeed a bias in the workplace. And the good news is it's changing. So tech jobs, when I was joining the workforce before the big tech crash, they were geared to more of this fun young male engineer that they were trying to recruit. And if you think of PayPal, or if any of you have read Brotopia, there are many examples of the tech job descriptions geared at these engineering roles that women may not have felt comfortable applying to. And this has changed over time. So you'll notice in 2017, last year, for example, Europe required that 40% of women be on a board. And in Norway, it was 10 years earlier that they actually required this. Governor Jerry Brown here in California signed a bill requiring companies to have women on all executive boards in the states starting next year. And in this year, Brotopia by a Bloomberg writer, Emily Chang, came out highlighting discrimination in tech and making a case for diversity. So I just want to check the panel here and see if anyone has any comments or questions. So feel free to add them as I'm going through the presentation. Another one that's very important, especially in tech. So if you're over 35, you may be discriminated against because you're over 35. But what companies are actually doing here is discriminating against their future self. So you'll notice here in tech, for those of you that aren't in it, I saw this one day and I thought, wow, this is my stepson who's 25, or my teen daughter or my teens that I'm managing, they're millennials. And when they're talking about old people, they're talking about me because I happen to be over 35. When we say old people, right now in tech, it really means people over 35 that many are talking about. But the workforce is changing. So by 2024, workers 55 and older will be the largest group. You can see here that people are naturally aging. It's not something that you can stop. And if you look at some of the job descriptions or some of the marketing that's out there, it's making people feel bad for something, again, they can't stop. So this is a great example of an email I received recently. I'm not looking for a job. I'm an independent consultant. I help companies scale and grow, but someone thought they could help me by telling me or asking me if youngsters were racing ahead of me in the workforce, or if my boss was younger than me. This isn't a bad thing, but if your language is using this type of marketing, then it will not encourage me to actually apply, but rather detract me. So you can see here another example. Senior Apple engineer retired from working at Apple after creating some great things, and then got bored and thought, you know what, I want to go back to work, but I want to do something different. I want to work at a Genius bar. I know the products. I think it would be great. And this engineer, retired engineer, talked about not being able to get a job at a Genius bar because of their wrinkles. So the ageism is live and well in tech, but we in recruiting and HR can change this and how we're building our companies and our recruiting programs. So subliminal messaging and job posts are things you want to talk about. We'll later in the webinar, I'll share some technology out there that's helping with these types of messages. So adding something like super young, office parties, young, dynamic, this won't get highly skilled workers who are not necessarily interested in the keg parties to apply. For someone like myself, yes, keg parties are great, but I'm more interested in financial returns and growing the company. I have different interests than super young, dynamic job opportunity. So you want to think about it. Even digital native, that can detract some people if they've learned digital but they didn't grow up in it. So for myself, for example, I got my first computer when I was in grade 8, and my children today know how to use iPads and they have cell phones, but they didn't exist in my time. But that doesn't mean that someone my age isn't able to use digital products and work in a digital workforce. So looking at ethno-racial in the workforce, there are many, obviously, that make up the fabric of countries around the world. In the US, I selected 2. African Americans, for example, they comprise of 12% of the workforce in the US, yet they make up 7.9% of computer and math. I believe this is changing and this number is going to go up. Arlen Hamilton, for example, is the first Black gay venture capitalist to be featured on Fast Company. She used to be homeless, and today she's funding women of color companies because she's realized that her passion and her goals in the tech world are to fund these companies. When it comes to another big representation in the United States, Latinos, they make up 17% of US workers, but only 6.8% of the computer and mathematical occupations. Now, thankfully, in especially public schools where my children go to school, this is changing with a bigger focus on programs specifically geared towards children that come from Latin families and that are immigrants in the US, to help them get involved in technology. We can talk about, but here are just some of them. So sexual orientation, how someone looks can instantly impact your view of their qualifications. So when they walk through the door, are you immediately discriminating them because of their size, for example, or because their hair is bright purple? Do they have a disability that you feel that may hinder them from being able to apply or do the job? And then one that isn't talked about, but I see coming up more often, is class. So there are different classes of people. We grow up in different parts of the world, rural versus urban. That can impact how people speak and how they think about things. That isn't bad. It's just simply different. So there are many other represented classes, and large companies especially are talking about this. So for example, google.org, they're funding a program to really focus. They've put $20 million towards people with disabilities and hiring more people with disabilities. So for example, Facebook this year hired its first blind engineer, and through these programs, they're hoping that this will not only raise awareness of the ability of people with disabilities, but also help alleviate more poverty, because often when people with disabilities can't get a job, then they end up in poverty. Other positive signs, for example, Apple's Tim Cook and other gay leaders such as venture capitalists Peter Thiel and Megan Smith, they're coming up and they're becoming policy advisors on technology from a government perspective. And companies like Salesforce are taking a huge stance on biases by canceling programs, for example, in Indiana or in other states when they've felt that there are major biases or discrimination towards people that are different. So how do we get executive buy-in? Well, there's some incredible stats out there that can help when you're going to your executives. Wide study recently of 2 million public and private companies in Europe by the International Monetary Fund, for example, found that firms with more women in senior roles realized a significantly higher return on assets. And so when you're able to bring these kind of stats to the workplace, it's obvious why the European Union as a whole would pass that 40% of all boards in Europe have to be women, for example. Other stats you can see here, Janet Stovall recently did a webinar, a TEDx on ethnic diversity, and showed that ethnically diverse companies perform at a 33% better rate. Workplaces for better or best workplaces for diversity show a 24% higher revenue growth. So these are profound stats that you can bring to your executives when you're making a case for why you should think about ethnically diverse recruiting practices for your workplace. So what happens when you create an inclusive culture? Well, gender diverse companies are 21% more likely to experience above average profitability and 27% more likely to create long-term value than those that aren't gender diverse. And these aren't stats we're making up, but stats that McKinsey released, for example. Inclusive teams reported making better decisions 87% of the time. And teams that follow an inclusive process make decisions 2 times faster with half the meetings, right? How many of us love being in meetings? Not many of us. One of the companies I recently did some consulting work for had a huge sign in each conference room that said meetings should not be booked for more than 15 minutes. If you do, there better be a good reason. And if you do have these 15-minute meetings, why bother sitting down? Stand up. It'll make things go faster. This is the kind of workplace that is being created, ones that people don't like being in meetings. So if you can create a culture that can make decisions 2 times faster with half the meetings, this is yet another great reason to think about more diverse companies. And then decisions are made and executed by diverse teams and delivered faster, 60% better results. So these are pretty interesting stats that you can share. You all get a copy of this webinar at the end. MCSI is a leading provider in investment decision-making tools. They found that with at least 3 women on the board, they had higher returns on investment by 11%, and their earnings per share were 45% higher than companies with no women directors. Now, when I look at companies, when I was applying to jobs and throughout my career, I would always go to the About Us page to find out, well, who's at the top? Who are the executives at the top? That's important to me. And being able to show these kind of stats and having more women as directors or leaders that we can grow from, or people that are more like ourselves, we're more inclined to join those companies. So what actions can you take today to create more inclusive hiring programs? Well, we all know that it doesn't happen overnight. It will probably take some unlearning and then some re-education of your executives and your company as a whole. This shouldn't be looked at something that people roll their eyes when you're introducing or talking about it, but rather something that they should look forward to, that something that's in it for them, and that it's going to make the business better. So one of the great places I believe in starting these type of conversations is looking at your target customer. If you look at your customer and the buyer of your product, are you representing the different personas, right? So if you think about any sort of consumer product that you create, women buy 60 to 70% of consumer products out there. So if you don't have women making decisions at your company, are you really reflecting the personas of your product? Janet Stovall also said, diversity is a numbers game, inclusion is about the impact. Well, as recruiters and people in HR, I believe that you can mandate diversity, and you also have to cultivate inclusion. And this will also happen at the government level when companies like Salesforce, for example, puts their foot down and says, no, we're no longer requiring our employees to come and work in your state because you're creating laws that are discriminatory. So some of the things that I like to talk about when I talk about diversity and inclusion with my clients, you really need to educate your executives, your company. You need to empower them to feel good about what your mission statement, your vision, your values are about. And you need to revise your recruiting practices. Make it safe and comfortable for your employees to come to work so that they don't feel like they may be harassed. Or if you're making a focus of hiring mothers, for example, or you have mothers, you need to have a place where they feel safe with their if they're going to be breastfeeding their children and need a place to pump milk. So these kind of and opportunities to empower your employees and to feel safe will allow you to retain and hire a more diverse workplace. I mean, after all, if you think about it, our families, the makeup of families today, not only in the US but globally, is changing because our economy is changing as well, and everything's moving faster. And thankfully, people are becoming more accepting of differences. So I want to look at some case studies, and these are all resources. You can go to their website and learn more about them in depth. But Slack, for example, made a conscientious effort to ensure that they hire women. And today they are proud to say that they have 43.5% women in their organization and 48% in leadership. Twilio, I recently worked with a couple people at the company and was so inspired by what they're doing at the company. They report these stats right on their website. And you can see here, they make a conscientious effort, for example, to have 30% underrepresented populations in the US. Globally, the number is a little bit lower, but they're actively working on ensuring that they represent not only their customers, but what they believe in, what their vision and values are. And then last but not least, I want to look at RD Station. They're a company in Brazil, and they have made a conscientious effort to have a culture code that they launched in 2014 to talk about diversity and inclusion and the code of conduct, which they believe is very important to them. So they created pillars. There are 6 of them, and I'm going to talk about each of them in the slides coming up next. So one of them is in Brazil, for example, there is a law that says companies with more than 100 employees must hire disabled people. And their goal, for example, at RD Station is to have at least 4%. That's their goal. And today they have 2.7%. They've hired people in all departments with disabilities, autism, blindness, and hearing conditions. So they're proud of this program. They've even branded it to help attract more people with disabilities in their organization, and they know they still have work to do in this program. Another initiative is hiring women. So they created a group called Ruby on Rails, and they help and host women and girls, so teenagers, with coding programs to encourage them to go in this field and to be able to hire more women. And I love this slide that they shared with us, because living in Silicon Valley myself, the elephant, I realized, isn't just in the Bay Area in San Francisco, but also Brazil has this challenge as well, and they're taking it seriously. So they want to raise the bar. They want to ensure that they are being more inclusive and that they're not turning away women as they have children, and their needs and focuses shift. But that doesn't mean they're not still very dedicated to work. They just also want to have time to be parents as well. And so Brazil, for example, has a 4-month paid maternity leave. They offer 6 months, and Brazil offers or requires companies to give 10 days off for men. Having children, they give 20 days. For any same-sex couple having children, they also give them the same leave that they give mothers having children. So they're taking this very seriously. They also offer women that are pregnant one-on-one coaching and preparation for their maternity leave, and then they have support programs for them when they come back. So they're really taking it seriously. Another program that they've started, it's called Black and Block. That's the translation in English from Portuguese. And they have today, these are stats from them that they've shared. They have 8% of their population at the company are of Black or brown color. And so it's very important for them, and they want to ensure that they are inclusive. In fact, so much that they're organizing a large celebration and Black Consciousness Day at the company, and they're going to focus for a week on discussing racism throughout not only the city, but also the country and the history and what they're doing about it to combat these challenges. And so one more example, today they have 10% of their employees declare themselves as part of the LGBT community, and they recently hired their first transgender employee. They're very open about this because they want people to know that they embrace anyone, and they're not looking at what the person looks like or their sexual orientation, but rather what do they bring to the table and how can they help the company grow. So they're constantly measuring this through an index, and they know they have a lot of work to do, but they've also hired people in their HR group specifically focused on ensuring that diversity and inclusion is an important part of their future. So with that, I'd like to now focus on technology and creating a recruiting culture that's inclusive, because it's often the recruiters and HR teams that go to the executives and come with the solutions. So I'd like to first talk about HackerEarth Recruit, who is hosting us today on this webinar. It's a technical recruitment software that allows companies to use online coding tests to automate their technical screening processes. So if you're recruiting and you want to diversify your teams and strengthen your business through purely merit-based hiring, there are platforms out there that recruiters can set up, so you don't have to, it's not difficult, it's the technology's there. Anyone with little or no experience can set it up. They can become automated online technical assessments, and the reports are able to show you individual candidate results, and you can conduct them from anywhere. So it saves you hours, and making sure that you're not focused on anything that may be an ism or a bias. And something that's really interesting today for any of you who are on LinkedIn, you may have noticed that Amazon, since 2015, I believe they've been building an artificial intelligence recruiting platform, but they have realized after 3 years that it was discriminating women in this artificial program that they were building. So today they announced that they're scrapping it. And so I'm very happy to hear it. And I'm happy that there are platforms out there today that can help get past these biases and help companies and recruiters hire faster by looking at the skill sets instead of by looking at what the person looks like or their religion or their belief systems. So with platforms, there are many others out there that you can leverage, and they will help you write your job descriptions through augmented writing. So to make sure that you're removing anything that may prevent someone from applying because they feel like they may not be comfortable or they may be too old to apply to the job. They're more inclusive, shall we say. And then another idea I'd like you to consider is eliminating the limits, any labels and biases, and focusing on abilities by hosting independent reviews. When you have a group of people interviewing at once or sharing their feedback before everyone has had a chance to interview this person, you're instantly creating a bias, because if someone like your boss says something negative about that person, then you may feel less inclined to say, well, actually, I thought that person brought a lot to the table and I would like to move this person forward, because you don't want to go against what your boss is saying. So these are some of the ideas. There are definitely other platforms out there. Textio, for example, helps you with augmented writing. I often use it for my own blog writing as well. It's a powerful platform out there. And I'll leave you with these next steps, and then there are resources on the next slide as well for you to go to as well. But next steps, share some of the stats that I've shared today with your executives and show why diversity and inclusion can help the triple bottom line. The people, your employees, feel more inclusive or included in your company, and your profits and your planet, your global hiring strategy. You don't have to put out a big initiative to start. I always say start anything small. Get feedback from your employees. How would they feel more inclusive? You may want to educate your employees and tell them why this is important. It may mean unlearning. You'll want to talk about events, clubs, stories. Include stories in your weekly newsletters to your employees. And I believe that it shouldn't be an after work program, but also one that's mandatory and one that's in part of your onboarding of new employees. Inclusion, like Janet Stovall said, it's not just diversity, but how are you going to implement it and make it truly part of your company values? And then, of course, there's technology out there today to ensure that you're evaluating your candidates fairly without including a bias or an ism. And one of the ways that you can hold yourself and your company accountable is by tracking your success and regularly reporting on it. So many other resources that I used, Atlassian, for example, put out a great report recently on diversity. They realized they had a challenge at their company. They had a problem and they wanted to fix it. Many of the companies that I researched and people I talked to agreed that they don't have all the answers. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but it's putting that first step forward and building a foundation of strong interpersonal relationships with your executives and your employees, so that everyone agrees this isn't something that we should do because we have to, but something that will make our business better. And so with that, I'd be happy to take any questions or comments or stories that you may have about your company and what you're doing to make a more diverse and inclusive program. Arbaz, I don't know if you had any questions or if you wanted to end the webinar with any additional comments.
So as of now, we don't have any questions. So, okay, we have one. So you can just address that.
Unfortunately, I'm not able to see them. So if you'd like to read it out loud, I'd be more than happy to.
Yeah, so the question says, how do you track DE&I?
Yeah, so there are programs that you can subscribe to and that help you with tracking this. So, for example, RD Station does this anonymously, where employees give feedback and they ask a set of questions talking about, do you feel like you're included, or what can we do to make things better? Um, so there are different companies out there that help. I would encourage you to start by doing something anonymous where your employees can give feedback, and so that you can get that as more powerful data. And then working with your HR team, they're able to look at stats: how many women, how many people with disabilities. Of course, if companies or people choose not to disclose any disability that you may not be able to see, or their sexual preferences, of course you may not be able to report on all of that, but there are programs out there that help companies with this type of reporting. And then of course with recruiting platforms, you're also able to report on this data. Oh, so now I do see some questions here. I apologize. Um, so yes, you will be getting a copy of the PowerPoint today. And then that's a great question. How do you avoid making people feel like a token hire if we're asking them for feedback? Well, that's a great question. So I believe that when you're asking these questions, you want to make sure you're asking everyone. You're not just sending it to, like, for example, Facebook, reported that they hired their first blind person. Well, when you want to survey the whole company and get a wide range of answers, not just from people who may be different than your average tech worker, for example. So how do you suggest that line employees provide feedback to the C-suite regarding the approval or disapproval of diversity and inclusion programs? So I would actually start by talking to your peers, getting feedback if they maybe feel the same. I believe that there's power to more voices being heard together, and then going to your manager to get executive support first from them. And then another great resource is your HR team. They should be there for you to support you in your inclusion programs. And many of the people that I've talked to, so for example, with Twilio, they started some of these programs very small, just get-togethers for people to just talk about the challenges they were having in tech. And then from there, it grew into something bigger. So it can start small. You don't even, I see meetups all the time about different people in tech just springing up, people getting together. And if you don't want to put it on Meetup, you can post it on a board, for example. Like when I was first starting to have children 12 plus years ago, I went to Craigslist to see what kind of mommy groups were out there in tech. Today on Facebook, I belong to women in tech who are mothers, for example. So there are different ways, and it doesn't even have to be at your company to start, but finding just in tech or in your industry in general are different ways to get more power to your voice, for example, and then bringing it to your C-suite. All right, so if we don't have any other questions, I feel free to email me, and thank you everyone for your time.
So thank you so much to Miss Emilia from all of us at HackerEarth. It was a great session. I hope everyone had a great time and got to know something new, and got to know more about the industry. So a big thanks to Miss Emilia for sharing her information and all the stats that she did. And a big thank you to all attendees that we had. I know it's a little difficult to take out time from your busy schedules, but thanks a lot for making it. Hope you have a great day ahead.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.